I'm going to figure out how to mute everybody. A lot of people. This is fantastic. All right.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to
Ray.
thank Greg because there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to organize something like this. So, Greg, thank you for that. I'd like to thank Doug as well and the Dell Medical School at the University of Texas for hosting. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. I've heard a lot about the PMI Healthcare Austin group. So appreciate you listening in, and I plan on making this worthwhile. I also understand from talking to Greg and Doug is that you guys had a session last time on Agile. And Agile has its roots in Lean. And of course, Lean is where value stream mapping comes from. So hopefully this will just be a good logical extension. So with that, then let's get started. Hang on while I get my screen activated here. Let me know when you can see this.
Okay. I'm going to make you the co-host.
Okay. Hang on one second. You see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Just have to make it full screen. There you go. Yep.
Got it. Okay. So I'm going to have a brief introduction here, and before we get into that, just a small intro about myself. And I say short because I don't like to talk about myself, but I've had the fortune of working with clients all over the globe. I've worked about 12, 13 countries across 4 continents and more than 200 teams that have just achieved some extraordinary results. And so, I learned value stream mapping by working early in my career with some Japanese colleagues. And they really kind of opened my eyes as to what could be possible for really creating a value stream that was super streamlined and focused on the customer. So I'm going to get into an introduction about value stream mapping. Then we're going to get into the why do it, and then how and when. And I'm going to, before we conclude, I'm going to get into some very specifics about how you can make this work in your different organizations, right? All right, so brief introduction then. Value stream mapping is, I won't even call it a tool because it's really a methodology. It's a technique that has a direct impact, and I'll say simultaneously, on customers, employees, and the business. So how does that work? Well, customers, from the standpoint that you're really streamlining the business, you're looking at the process from the customer perspective, and you're walking the process end to end and making sure that you're squeezing all the waste out so that they ultimately benefit through a better customer experience. I've also found out that from an employee standpoint, when we redesign a process, ultimately the employees are more satisfied. Now, why is that? It's because a lot of the employees they've had all these ideas as to how to improve the process for years, but they just really hadn't had a forum for people to listen to them. And so once you get these employees in a room, and then I call it, you do brain surgery on them, they tell you the best ways to improve the process and how to squeeze all the non-value added out. So ultimately, the employee satisfaction goes up. Then from a business standpoint, I can also tell you from experience that not only do you reduce costs, but in most cases, you simultaneously improve the revenues at the same time. And I can give you some examples of that as we go through. So it's very impactful, and I hope that you will embrace the techniques that I'm going to share with you. All right, so let's get into why do this. I already kind of gave you a precursor to that, but I'm going to show you this slide, which is one of my favorite slides in the whole deck that I'm going to show you today. What you're seeing here is that as cycle time increases, that costs go up and quality goes down. Okay, so why do costs go up? Well, costs go up because there's more non-value added in the process. Quality goes down because the processes are a lot more, typically they're a lot more complicated. So now I want you to take a look at this slide, think of it a little bit differently. Now I want you to view it from right to left. Now if I decrease cycle time, the cost will come down and the quality will come up, right? All right, so just remember that as we go through this entire presentation, you'll find that my whole strategy is based on reducing cycle time. Okay, so I'm going to focus a little bit on process because by reducing cycle time, we're going to ultimately try to achieve process excellence, and in some cases, process perfection. You won't achieve process perfection, but it's certainly a good goal. So here's some statistics for you, and the purpose for this slide is to show that, and you already know this, that we're shifting, from more from a manufacturing to a service environment. Now, why is that important? Well, because of social media. You look at 3.5 billion Google searches per day. Look at all of the active users on Facebook. And we're not talking millions, we're talking billions. And then the number of tweets per day. I think half of those are Donald Trump. No, I won't even go there. But okay, so in a service economy, what's important is not just what you do, but it's also how you do it. So there's a more and more focus on process excellence. Let me show you the proverbial people, process, and technology circles. You've all seen this, and I want to show you this slide in this dimension. I also want to mention that you see the black sweet spot in the center. The more that I can push these different elements together for any business, then the larger that sweet spot becomes, and that becomes then the operational excellence for the company that embraces this. So now let me show you this slide in a little different format. So I'm gonna show you it in a different dimension, okay? And it looks like this. Whenever you have a focus on people and process, you see, okay, that what's most important is people on top, and the people need to be supported by a process, and then the processes need to be supported by technology. And when you have companies that focus on technology, you see that that thing is upside down, right? And I can give you an example of this. I went into, there's a major pharmaceutical manufacturer here in the US, well, it's actually globally, and they had just implemented a new ERP system. And the salesman told me, hey, if you implement this new ERP system, we turn it on and your company is going to produce better results. Well, guess what? They turned on the new ERP system and they didn't get better results. And so they asked me to come in and we took a look at what was going on. We had to basically set up 14 teams across the company. We redesigned every major business process. And once we did that, we're starting to get the results that the company was expecting. We took, for example, on time for customer service from 76% to greater than 95%. At the same time that we reduced their inventories by $50 million a year. So in that particular example, we cut their costs and we had about a 25% uplift in their revenues. So just keep in mind that the technology should support the process and not the other way around. All right. Now, let's get into, I'm kind of giving a flavor as to why we want to do this. I want to talk now about how we define it. And then I'm going to give you some specific examples I think that we can all relate to. So the invite that Greg sent out, I just copy and pasted that invite right into this slide. I mentioned already that it has its roots in Lean. And I told you personally that I discovered it by working with my counterparts in Japan. And it's really all about taking a long-winded value stream like you see depicted in that, that value stream at the top, where you see a lot of non-value add and then very little value add as depicted by the gray parts, non-value add by the purple part. And then as you redesign a future, better state process, you see where we've squeezed out as much as possible on the non-value add. Now, why haven't we squeezed out more? Well, I'll tell you right now that there's some non-value add that you can't get rid of. And so the strategy is, if you can't get rid of it, what you need to do is to try to optimize by reducing the amount of waste. So now what's value add, what's non-value add? Okay, so many of you have probably seen the non-value added activities as shown on the left here. Again, this has its origins in the Toyota production system, where a lot of the lean management methods came from. So the reason weighting is at the top is because when I go into companies, and I'm sure you've seen it as well in your experiences, just dealing with, as a consumer of products and services, you see that there's weighting for everything. And I'll give you some specific examples. So weighting is top of the list. And then defects, well, whenever you create a defect, that's when you have rework. And whenever you have rework, then you have the waste of motion and transportation. So whenever you get one of these non-value added activities in a process, you get the others for free. So what I'm saying by that is, if you don't streamline the process and get rid of, like for example, defects, you get all of the other non-value added that you didn't plan on, and it increases the waste of waiting, which has a negative impact on cycle time. So then you see the chart on the right, which, and I'm not exaggerating here when I say usually when you look at a long-winded process, 95% or sometimes even greater of non-value added activities. And those are all the activities that are shown on the left. And then it's not unusual then to only have 5%. I had one process I worked on where it was actually 99% non-value add and 1% value add. Okay, so there's really a good book that I'd highly recommend called Lean Thinking. And in that book, the author said this, that if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. I started my career at HP, and the founders of HP, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, were both electrical engineers, and so that's why they started the company, because they started the company designing measurement and instruments. And Bill Hewlett always had a saying too, something that stuck with me early on, and that is, you can't measure, you can't manage it. The authors of Lean Thinking went on to say then, if you can't properly identify and analyze how things are linked together, then there's no way you can improve it, and consequently, there's no way you can ever perfect it. Okay, so let me give you some practical examples now. Let's talk about Starbucks. Now with COVID-19, you can't even go into the store anymore. And that's actually been a positive impact on not being able to go into the store, because when you go through the drive-through, the drive-through actually runs a lot faster. But you think of, okay, so when I go to Starbucks now, if I just left this presentation, went to my local Starbucks, got in line at the drive-through, I can tell you it would take me 20 minutes to get through that whole process. Now think about, okay, the people inside making that coffee drink. For the drink that I want, I can tell you that the value add is probably less than 2 minutes. So just in that example there, 20 minutes compared to 2 minutes, you see that the value add is 90-10, right? Okay, so now next example, to the right of the Starbucks logo, you see that's a sprinkler that we've all seen, right, in office buildings and hotels. And I was at a factory in Lubbock, Texas, and I was walking through the factory with the managing director. And I just happened to ask him, I said, hey, Andy, I said, how long does it take you to make one of these sprinklers? And he looked at me and he said, value add or non-value add? And I almost had a heart attack because that's the first time I had an executive actually speak to me in my language. He said, well, he says the total non-value added time there for that sprinkler is 3 weeks. And what he was talking about is from the time that they get the raw materials in the door until the sprinkler shipment is ready to go out the door. And he said, if you sat me down and had me do it, I could do it in 2 hours. So there's an example of 3 weeks versus 2 hours. All right, so now I'm going to get into more specifics, and I'm going to give you this example, which is a IT upgrade example. Okay, so there's really 3 parts of this IT upgrade. So there's the planning piece, and then there's the execution piece, and then there's kind of quality control and handover. So if you look at the planning in this example, and by the way, the source of this is by a case study by Bong Kung Jong and Tom Yoon. So they showed in this particular planning example, you see the 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Well, if you add all that up, you see there's only 130 minutes of value add, and there's 20 days and 130 minutes of 20 days of non-value add, making the total time to be 20 days and 130 minutes. Okay, that's just for the planning piece. Now, if we look at the execution, you see the different phases of the execution process there. You see that the total value added time is 505 minutes, and the non-value added time is 8 minutes, making the total time for execution at 8 days, 505 minutes. All right, now for quality assurance and handover, kind of the same story. You got 120 minutes of value add, 3 days of non-value add. So 3 days and 120 minutes is the total cycle time. By the way, when you see lead time and cycle time, I use those two synonymously. Okay, so now let's take a look at the whole process. Again, this is end-to-end for a simple IT upgrade. You see that the bottom line is 755 minutes versus a non-value added time of 31 days. And if you do the math on that, you find out that it's quite a small percent. Now, the other thing I want to mention here too is whenever I do a workshop to redesign a process, a long-winded process like this, when I set a goal for cycle time, I get the team to start thinking not in days and hours. I automatically jump to minutes, and I do that for psychological reasons. I want them to stop thinking about months or days or hours. I want them to start thinking about minutes, because a lot of times you can achieve things in a whole lot less time. And so I change the currency to get them psychologically thinking about a lower unit versus what they've been used to thinking about. Okay, so this is an IT example. Now, Greg and Doug and I talked about a clinical example. So this is just one that I came up with, and I'm sure everybody on the call has gone through this process before, and I'll have Doug add some color to this after we go through it. So you see, on the left, you start with scheduling an appointment, and then you end up with the follow-up visit after everything is on the mend. So yeah, you schedule the appointment. That doesn't take very long at all. And then there's a wait of about 14 days. Then you get in for your annual checkup, and then if he refers somebody, then you have to go to insurance for your approval. More waits in that process. You schedule the appointment again. That doesn't take very long. Then you finally get to see the doctor that was referred to, and then he writes a prescription. And I've included in that box actually obtaining the prescription as well. But when you think about visiting the doctor, what I've included in the first box and also this box is the time it takes you to actually drive to the doctor's office, park your car, go into the waiting room, etc. So I've tried to be very realistic as to how much time it's taking here. And then you make a follow-up appointment, and then you have your follow-up visit. And if you look at the value added time there, it's 465 minutes versus 58 days, and you're seeing a percent value add of 1.6%. And I was being very conservative on that because I said, okay, well, let's just not do running time. Let's take a look at it based on an 8-hour business day. So that gives you a perspective as to how much waste is actually in the process. Doug, what you want to add some comments?
Yeah,
on
I'd like
that?
to jump in here as sort of a recent example. I'm not sure if I would have talked about this before COVID happened. That's what everybody seems to be talking about. But as it relates to some things that we've done here at Dell Med, and specifically UT Health Austin, and potentially some of you already experienced, is the use of telemedicine. So I realize that there's different payment models where telemedicine may not make sense, and some of those have been relaxed for a COVID response. But I think in the future, if you look at the time it takes to schedule like an in-person appointment and actually drive there, essentially take off work, and determine, well, some of these things make sense to maybe incorporate a technology that makes sense and that's appropriate for the condition of the patient, the preference of the patient, and similarly the expectations that the healthcare provider might have. So, this is I think telemedicine is a good example of a significant value add, again, where appropriate and where it makes clinical and financial sense. So if we were to do a value stream mapping process of how potentially telemedicine can increase the value add, I think it's pretty apparent.
No, thanks for that, Doug. And it also brings up a point when whenever there's a crisis, all of a sudden it creates more of a sense of urgency, and people were actually able to do some pretty amazing things, right? They just put their mind to it. I've noticed. I mentioned Starbucks earlier, but our local Torchy's here in Lakeway, man, you put in your order for takeout and it just happens a whole lot faster, right? All right, so I want this example. There's another clinical example, and I wanted to show you this because if you read the book Learning to See by Shook, he talks about value stream mapping, and you can get them to be very complicated like this. On the other hand, if I go back, they don't have to be that complicated. My first value stream map was basically an Excel spreadsheet, and so somewhere between the Excel spreadsheet and this diagram is this Visio flowchart. So, it doesn't matter what the tool is. Don't get wrapped around the axle as to, being able to create a value stream map that looks like this. It's really not necessary. It's great for visual purposes, but it's not necessary in order to squeeze waste out of the process. All right? All right, so let's go on. This is my point of view on the current state of business processes. And again, over the years, it seems like we've lost the art and science of process excellence. I see it doesn't matter what client I go into now, the processes are extremely sluggish, and they're out of control. What I mean by that is, to me, process control equals process management. They're just not being managed, and they're not being managed because they're not documented and they're not measured, right? And so consequently, they don't deliver expected results, and people don't understand why they're not delivering the expected results. I find that in today's tool-centric environment, that in fact, it just came up a couple of weeks ago at the client I'm currently working on. I said, "Gee, isn't there a tool where we could automate that?" I'll tell you a story about Toyota because I told you earlier that these techniques have the roots in the Toyota production system. Do you know when Toyota orders a piece of machinery or a tool, that when it comes in the door, that's the worst it's ever going to perform? So what do? They take it, even though it's brand new, and they start measuring it, and then they start managing it, and they start driving improvement. So it's all about taking the process and measuring it and finding out what's working, what's not working, and trying to squeeze as much waste out as possible. The other problem we have is there's no end-to-end view. And in fact, I was leading a workshop, I guess about a month ago, got the right subject matter experts in the room. And in Japanese terms, you might see this term called Gemba. Well, those are the subject matter experts. Those are the people that are actually working in the process. You got to have them involved in the process redesign. But they're in the room and they said, you know, this is the first time we've actually all gotten into a room. And I guess it was greater than a month ago because I was working virtually then. So it was probably more like 2 months ago. And they said, first time we've seen this thing end to end. The other point is second to the last bullet there is just very low expectations for what can actually be achieved by process excellence. And a lot of this has to do with, you know, they've never seen excellence before, or maybe they've never realized how much non-value add is in the process, and they just assume that that's just the way the process was designed and that's the way it's expected to perform from now and forevermore. And then my last bullet there is just a lack of systems. When I say systems, I'm talking about integrated process optimization. And the reason that this is important is because whenever you take a look at the end-to-end processes and you're trying to optimize the end-to-end and not optimize the part. I learned this from Dr. Deming firsthand by attending a seminar with him. And that is that sometimes in order to optimize the whole, you have to sub-optimize a part, all right? And so that's critical that you understand that concept, because a lot of people think, well, in order to optimize a whole, I have to optimize every part, and it doesn't always work that way. Okay. All right, so let's go on and let's talk about a recommended approach. And I already told you it's not about lowering cost, okay? So pretty, you know, it's just staggering that 41% of companies rate their process improvement unsuccessful, and it's because they focus on cost savings. Whenever I have a client saying, okay, we need to redesign the process because we need to shave some costs, I'll tell them, okay, I can shave some costs, but my focus is going to be on using cycle time as the driver, right? And then 33% of companies rate their PI programs successful based on focus on process improvement and customer satisfaction. All right, so now this is probably my second most favorite slide. And the reason this is hopefully will resonate to you, you see the boxes in the pink, the process steps in the pink. You see where complete value stream mapping is the third process step. And then you see second to last, develop detailed implementation plan. You can't have radical process redesign without value stream mapping, and you can't have radical process redesign without implementation plans to make it happen, right? And I know you guys have all been preaching that to your leaders for quite some time. So let me just start at the top then. You pick the process and form the team. And this is important that you get this sequence right, because a lot of times I see companies will form a team and then they say, okay, this team now is going to fix this process. That's backwards. You need to fundamentally identify what the process is and then pick the right team members that can that understand that process end to end, and then get them on board, create a charter statement, and then turn them loose, take the straitjacket off and let them run with it, okay? So then the next step is understand what the customer expectations for that particular value stream. Once you understand that, then you do some training. So let's you see on the right the box that shows education. What's important is that you take the people that are in the workshop, all of the people that are participating, and you train them on what's value add and what's non-value add. You teach them those 7 forms of waste. You take examples from their current process and say, okay, is this value add or non-value add? Or is it a combination of both? And if it's, if it's a combination of both, say, okay, if it's non-value add, can we get rid of it, right? If we can't get rid of it, then how can we minimize it? So you give them basically a new set of glasses, and then you turn them loose so they can see the process from the customer perspective and from your perspective. They can do the value stream map, and then they can move into the analysis of, okay, what is value add, what's non-value add, and then the critical piece is setting the goal. This is kind of the tipping point for this whole process. The goal has to be, and I say a SMART goal. The SMART for me is not what you're typically used to, because you're typically used to as well. Okay, it's a, it's specific and it's measurable and it's attainable. And I'm going to change the S and A. Okay, for me, S is for stretch, and then it's measurable, and the A is the most important. I'm going to come back to that. The R is for realistic. So the R balances the stretch. It has to be a stretch, but it also has to be realistic. And then of course, T is time bound. A is the most important because every time that I've had a team come up with a goal, let's say we're going to take a process from, and I'm not exaggerating, from 50 days to 10 days, and I get them to align, which is what the A stands for. If I get them aligned on that goal and they all sign up for it, I'll repeat that, I've never had a team not achieve the goal. Okay, so I'll spend a lot of time, probably an inordinate amount of time, making sure that the team sets a goal that we can all be proud of achieving when it's all said and done. Okay, so we set the goal, and then we develop the 2B process. We design a measurement system so that we can measure our process after we cut it over. We then develop a detailed implementation plan, and then we implement. And then over on the right, you see the plan, do, check, act cycle. That's the cycle. For those of you who are not familiar with it, that's a cycle of continuous improvement. And I will say that, when you cut over a process, you're not going to achieve the goal right away, but within a very short period of time, I would expect by driving the continuous improvement process that you achieve the goal within, I'll say, 1 or 2 months after cutover. So now let me get a little bit more prescriptive on this process. Okay, so I call this the 5-day Ray Padilla methodology, and I mentioned earlier that I've worked with a whole lot of teams around the world, and I've kind of I've changed this process, I've improved it, and this is kind of where I've landed right now. This is a 5-day process. I've had some clients that say, gee, can you accelerate the process redesign process? So if the process isn't real complicated, I have done this in 3 days. I've squeezed this 5-day agenda into 3 days. So let's just kind of go through it a little bit now. Let me check the time. I want to make sure we have some time for question and answer. So day 1 is all about, forming the team, making sure we got a charter. And what I'll do is I'll have, in order to get that leadership support, I'll have them come in, tell the team, okay, anything goes, as long as it doesn't negatively impact customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction or quality, have at it, right? So I have him take the straitjacket off of the team so that they feel that they've got authority to make the decisions that are necessary to get the results that I expect them to get. So then we go through the training, as I've already mentioned, about value add, non-value add. Then I have them do this waste walk, which is basically doing the value stream mapping, and they focus on the cycle time. Then we do an analysis. What'd you come up with? And I'm looking to see if they're coming up with, that 10%, 90%, 20%, 80%. If they're coming back with something like 60-40 or 50-50, then we've got something wrong. Now, let me tell you why that's critically important, that they've come back with the right analysis. If they don't come back with the right analysis, let's say it's 60-40, okay, let's say the process has taken 50 days, and they say, well, yeah, out of the 50, 30 is non-value add and 20 is value add. That ultimately is going to impact the goal that they're going to set, right? So if they say, okay, well, we've got 30 days of non-value add, and we're going to squeeze out another 10 days. To me, see, that's just not good enough, because I know, having done this as long as I have, that there's a whole lot more non-value add in the process than that. So this is critical that they do this value stream map correct, because it ultimately affects the goal, and then the goal will drive the redesign, and then the redesign will ultimately drive the business results that we get. Okay, so I want to make sure that you understand that. Okay, so day 2, Tuesday. Oh, by the way, one of my clients in Scotland, he said, when I hired you, he said, I thought I was getting a consultant. He said, I discovered I got 2 for 1. And I said, so what do you mean? He says, I discovered I got a psychologist and a consultant. The reason he said that is because we went through one of these exercises, and by the end of day 1, he understood the psychology behind what I was doing, and what I wanted to happen at the end of day 1 happened, and that is that the team that did the value stream analysis, they were sick. I want them to be sick of the old process, and the reason I want them to be sick of the old process is because then they're ready to change it. So psychologically, end of day 1, I want them to be throwing up, to be having to look at the old process from end to end, and now be ready to change. So then day 2, they're ready to change. We do a quick review day 1. We do the review of what's value add, what's non-value add. Then I already went through my criteria for the SMART goal, and we spent a lot of time on what that SMART goal should be. And I don't, when we get into goal setting, I don't set a lot of goals. I focus on a goal, and that goal is based on cycle time. And by doing that, I know that I can, if I squeeze that cycle time, I'll say it again, I'm going to reduce the cost and ultimately improve the quality. So then I review the deliverables, because usually at this point, if I have a team of say 8 to 10 people, I'm going to split them in 2. And I give them the same instructions. Okay, here's what I want you to come back with. You've got the goal. And then I give them one tool before I turn them loose. And that tool is a blank sheet of paper. I give them a blank sheet of flip chart paper and said, don't think differently. Don't think about the old process. Think about a new process that's going to deliver the cycle time that we're all signed up. We all signed up for. So then they do the breakout, and they start the design of the future state process. And then that leads us to day 2. They'll complete the design. Then we bring them back together. I'll do a review, have each team review. Usually there's about 80% overlap of the design. And then what I do then is take the best of both for the remaining 20%. And then we all agree on one process that we're going to sign up to. And I've even had teams sign the process map that we come up with, say, okay, this is the future state design. Once we get to that point, I'll say, 90% of the effort is done, because we've designed the new process. Now it's a matter of coming up with the dashboard, how we're going to measure it, and then the detailed implementation plan, which is day 4 and day 5. All right. So at the end of day 5, then I will have the senior leadership team come in usually. In rare cases they don't, but most cases they do. And I have the team present. Okay, here's the ugly old process. Here's the value add, non-value add analysis. Here's the goal. Here's the new process. Here's some key enablers. Here's the measurement dashboard. And then here's the implementation plan. And oh, by the way, after we put together the detailed implementation plan, we also talk about the team structure and we create a schedule starting the immediate following week to have their first project checkpoint. And the reason I do that, most of you know, is because I want to carry on the momentum. All right, so that's the 5-day Ray Padilla methodology. Now, I'm going to show you this slide here because a lot of people think, you know, when you're trying to transform something that you need a lot of time. And I say, throw that out the window, because if you're trying to transform, too much time is your enemy. You have a window of opportunity right here, and you need to seize it and take advantage of it. This is why my 5-day methodology worked, because I've got those people in a room, I've got them pretty much sequestered, and they're focused, and it's amazing what kind of results you can get when you take that approach. All right? Okay, so here's some critical success factors. Executive support, you would have guessed that. Focus on the value stream. You know, set high expectations, make sure they're realistic. Accelerate the implementation. Make sure, I've mentioned this already, you've got to have the SMEs involved. Make sure you've got a measurement system so that you know exactly where you're at and your progress towards the goal. And then, you know, I've only had one team that's actually at cutover, they hit their goal, and the rest of them have driven that continuous improvement cycle in order to hit the goal within a very short period of time, no more than, say, 1 to 2 months after cutover. Oh, by the way, I should mention too that for the 5-day process, I've had this work 100% of the time, but there's one exception, and the one exception was as a Japanese manufacturing facility in Oklahoma City. And you're probably sitting there saying, yeah, not surprising, because, you know, they were probably expecting a whole lot more. Well, turns out they weren't expecting more. They were actually expecting less. By the middle of day 3, we had everything ready to go. I went and grabbed the facilities manager. I brought him into the room. We showed him the new design for a manufacturing process. And I said, can we start moving? Can we clear space? Can we start moving equipment? Any way possible we could have this process up and running before end of week? And the answer was yes. By end of week, we brought the senior leadership team down. Not only did we show them the old process in the conference room, we took them out on the shop floor, the manufacturing floor, showed them the new process up and running. So it can happen very quickly. Okay, so let me summarize real quickly. Focus on speed when you're identifying the business processes to redesign. Which ones are the most sluggish, okay? Item 2, focus on speed when generating the value stream map. Focus on speed during the process redesign and implementation. Very quickly then, some results. I'm not going to talk a lot about the specific examples here, but you can see, you know, 3 hours to 5 minutes, 64 days to 4 days, you know, about a year to 16 days. The 30 days to 22 hours, that was the example I just talked about at the Japanese manufacturing facility. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the 3 hours to 5 minutes. There was a cosmetics and jewelry manufacturing and distribution company in South America. We were able to cut their order entry and pick, pack, and ship time from greater than 3 hours to 5 minutes. And when we did that, we were able to, in one process in Colombia, we actually cut the employees from 39 to 21. And the reason I'm saying this is because, you know, I'm not contradicting something I said earlier. This is not about cutting employees or cost saving. The reason that this is important is because I struck a deal with the president of the company and said, okay, we're going to shave some people out of the process. And when we do that, you cannot lay them off. So what we did is we took those 18 people from the order entry and the pick and pack and distribution process, we put them into sales support, and guess what happened? In a matter of 2 months, the orders went from 10,000 orders per week to 14,000 orders per week. So you see how we cut the cost and we simultaneously increase the revenues, and all by using cycle time as a driver. Okay, now I'll be quiet. Open it up for Q&A. So Greg, do we have any questions? Hopefully we do.
Yeah, it looks like we've got one question from Bob Bemis.
Okay, hey Bob.
Yeah, it's in the chat. Is the Kaizen process a superset of VSM?
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, so Kaizen process is another term for that. Kind of the American term for that is a REI or I'm sorry, RIE, which is a rapid improvement event. And when you're going through the rapid improvement event, Bob, you must do, basically what I showed you with that 5-day process, that is a rapid improvement event, and you see how the value stream mapping is part of that process. Okay.
At this point, we don't have any other questions. If people are more comfortable typing their questions in the chat, please go ahead and do that. And if not, if you would like to speak, I think we can allow that as well. Doug, do you have any questions?
Yeah, so question I'd just like to ask any type of presenter. What are some of your favorite books on this subject?
Oh my gosh, okay. Yeah, I mentioned Lean Thinking. Bob mentioned Kaizen. Kaizen by Masaki Imai. He's also the founder of Kaizen Institute of America, and I had the pleasure of working with those Japanese consultants for part of my career. Learning to See by Shook will give you the ins and outs of value stream mapping.
Learning to See. Learning to See,
yeah. And then let's see, Simon Sinek wrote a book on, he also does some TED Talks, and he wrote a book on Start With Why. Okay, and he just thinks differently about things. And then his follow-on book was Leaders Eat Last. So let's see, what else?
There's one that I'm familiar with, and it's one of these books where I rarely read a book again, but when it sticks in your head, and it's The Phoenix Project. Have you heard of that one?
I've got that on my list, but I've not read it. No.
The Phoenix Project. It's actually a pretty updated book. It came out about 5 years ago, and it's based on kind of a seminal work done by Eliyahu Goldratt called The Goal.
Oh yeah. Yep, theory of constraint.
So the Phoenix Project is basically almost mimicking The Goal, where The Goal was about manufacturing. The Phoenix Project is about technology.
Yep. Oh, no, that's great. Okay.
That book's called The Phoenix Project. It's fantastic. I've read that one twice. So I always.
Okay. Well, that says a lot if you read it twice. Okay, so I'm going to get it on Amazon. I'll order it this week. Okay, so Ellie Goldratt, oh, yeah, you mentioned The Goal, and then he wrote another one about velocity, and his book on theory of constraints. Highly recommend. Yeah. And any of Deming's books, Thriving on Chaos is another good one.
Yeah, Deming's
Yeah, I spent a week with Dr. Deming at a seminar in Washington, D.C. with him and his disciples, and it was absolutely amazing. Oh, there's another good book too, which was the precursor to Lean Thinking, same authors, Womack and Jones, and it's called The Machine That Changed the World. It's all about the automobile industry, and then the roots of the Toyota production system.
Ooh, okay. Great. Do we get any other follow-up questions?
We do have one other question. Someone is asking about how you started and grown your business as a consultant.
Oh boy, okay. Well, that's a good. Yeah, this is the school of hard knocks. Okay, so I mentioned I started my career at HP, and when Hewlett-Packard were involved, back then, HP was considered to be a theory Z company. And what they meant by that was that it was operated much like a Japanese company where, it was all about people first. So I learned, I tell people I learned a lot at the HP University, and we had a joint venture in Japan called Yokogawa Hewlett-Packard. And that's where I first started working with my Japanese counterparts. And we decided to go after the Deming Prize. Now, short story on Deming Prize is given every year in Japan to a company that exhibits dramatic improvements in quality in product or service. And so HP decided to go after that prize, and I luckily landed on the team to help with that. And so after 18 years at HP, because I thought I was so smart, me and an HP colleague, we set out on our own, and we started a consulting company. And let me tell you, it was, you think if you hang out, you're single, and you've got all of this knowledge that the world will beat a path to your door. Well, it doesn't work that way. You got to have the marketing. So after about a year of almost starving to death, we linked up with a international consulting company, and that kind of jumpstarted my career. Now, fast forward now to 3 years ago when I joined Point B. And Point B, I don't know if you probably haven't ever heard of Point B before, but we were picked as the #1 medium-sized company to work for by Fortune magazine last year. And the beauty about Point B is, they take care of the people, who take care of the customers, who take care of the shareholders. And that's exactly the HP model when Hewlett-Packard were in charge. So yeah, it's tough getting started, but once you get started, you then, you learn as much from clients as they learn from you. And that's why now looking back, I've got all these stories to tell that I didn't have when I first started my career. So hopefully I answered your question. It's tough to get started, I'll tell you that. But once you get going, then you get the snowball rolling down the hill. Other questions?
All right.
Well, if you think of anything,
a little bit early.
That's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I really appreciate it. This was definitely a very kind of more in-depth lead on from our first session, which was in January, and then our second session about Agile in February. So thank you so much for this in-depth analysis. And for everybody on the call, this has been recorded, so I will publish this, actually send this to Greg, who could then distribute to not just the people that are on the call, but other members of PMI Austin. And thank you for our guest, actually, PMI Austin. I was thrilled that you're able to join. I think we're going to continue this. I started this just within Dell Med, but having met Greg, I'd like to just include this for all the PMI Austin members. And at some point, we'd like to actually welcome you physically into Dell Med as we get past this COVID. We've got some great conference space, and I'd love to have the networking opportunities between members of PMI Austin and Dell Medical School.
Hey, thanks
for having Doug. We do really appreciate the partnership. This is great. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, bye.